Thank you for joining us on our Made Local series to celebrate the publication of Greg Bear and Ryan Rosetsky's important book, When You Wonder, You're Learning, Enduring Lessons for Raising Creative, Curious, and Caring Kids. We are so honored to present Greg and Ryan with their book, which has been called Necessary, Essential, and a Blueprint for Our Times. Hello, I'm Stephanie Flom, Executive Director of Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures. Welcome. Made Local is presented in partnership with the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. Thank you to the library, which Greg and Ryan credit with providing the place where much of the book was researched and written. Thanks to Whiteware Bookstore, where you can purchase signed copies of When You Wonder. We are in for a treat. In this virtual Made Local presentation, Greg and Ryan, clearly two good friends, tell us about their backgrounds and their journey to answer the question, what do children need? This journey led them to discover that the Mr. Rogers, who we all know and love, intentionally utilized deep thinking and educational science to create a kind, curious, and creative atmosphere filled with wonder. We'll learn about the people they met, what they learned along the way, and how this journey has changed them, and how it can change us. Fred Rogers lessons are not just about nurturing creative, curious, and caring kids. You'll see for yourself as we welcome two creative, curious, and caring adults, Greg Bear and Ryan Rosetsky.
Hi everyone, I'm Greg Bear. Along with Ryan Rosetsky, we're the co-authors of this new book, When You Wonder, You're Learning. Here in Pittsburgh, I'm lucky to serve as the executive director of the Grable Foundation, a private charitable foundation that for decades has been serving children and youth in this region, particularly children and youth who don't have the same opportunities as their peers because of economic reasons. And we support them, their learning experiences, the educators in their lives, and their families to create wondrous, creative, great opportunities for learning in and out of school, early childhood, through their formative years. I'm also the co-chair for a learning network called Remake Learning, created nearly 15 years ago in this region, serving more than 600 schools, museums, libraries, early learning centers, creative industries, and campuses of higher education, together thinking about what is relevant, what is engaging, and what is equitable as we support young people throughout this region. I'm also a dad of two young daughters whom I hope have futures that are full of creativity and wonder. And this is Ryan.
Hi, my name is Ryan Rosetsky, and I am a former elementary school teacher. I taught a great group of 4th and 5th graders in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, before moving back to Pittsburgh, back to Western Pennsylvania, to become a journalist. And as a freelancer, I write about everything from science to space travel to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And it's my great pleasure to have worked with Greg on When You Wonder, You're Learning, Mr. Rogers' Enduring Lessons for Raising Creative, Curious, Caring Kids. The book is available now wherever you buy your books, and if you're in Pittsburgh, it's available with signed copies at White Whale Bookstore in Bloomfield. So this book is about 3 years in the making, but in many ways it's 15 years in the making, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. It really springs forth from 15 years of work in the work that I mentioned called Remake Learning. So let's take you back to late 2006, early 2007. And as teachers, librarians, youth workers, and others started to coming together and said, what is it that we can do to best support young people and their futures, knowing what their futures hold? And the really incredible thing as we were having those conversations is that as we were meeting with teachers and others, they were saying, I'm not connecting with kids the way that I used to. Now, on one hand, that seemed totally normal. I'm sure adults forever have said, oh, kids these days. But when they were saying it, they literally meant my classroom in 2005 versus my classroom in 2006, which at first seemed like a totally strange thing, as if something seismic was happening in kids' lives. And it feels naive in 2021 to say this, but we didn't know enough about the learning sciences and what we were learning about learning itself back in 2006 and 2007. And as we began to appreciate what it was that was happening, we could understand that kids, in fact, were developing their identities differently, seeking affirmation differently, consuming and producing information differently. And so the question was, if in fact something is seismically happening in kids' lives, how do we support them differently? How do we think differently about instruction in a classroom? How do we think differently about the design of exhibits at museums? How do we think differently about the experiences for kids in and out of school? And how do we really take in the learning sciences? And it's that aha about Fred Rogers as a learning scientist that 3 years ago prompted this book.
Yeah, like Greg said, in an effort to answer those questions, what do we need to do differently? We started digging into, okay, well, what are people finding out about how children and human beings learn? And I think one of the things that surprised us most was if you talk to some of the top scientists, many of whom are right here in Pittsburgh, if you read the latest research papers, scientists are talking about things that at first glance don't sound very scientific. They're not talking about charts and graphs and what's measured. They're talking about how do we make sure kids feel safe? How do we make sure kids feel like they belong to a community that cares about them? How do the kids feel that they matter? How do kids feel that they're loved and capable of loving in all the different spaces where children learn? That's when we realized that the latest learning science really reads like a script from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Because as cutting edge as these findings are, it was really Fred Rogers who, more than 50 years ago, designed the blueprint for how best children learn.
And so for 15 years, all across Western Pennsylvania, the birthplace of Fred Rogers, we've been talking about the Fred method. What is the Fred method? You can think of it simply like this as an equation. Timeless and classic plus future-facing equals the Fred method. Things like deep and caring relationships are timeless and classic and are always going to be important in kids' lives. And so too is what is innovative and future-facing. When we think about Fred Rogers, we can think about him as a disruptor, as an innovator, someone who took the newfangled technology of his day, television, and said, how do I make that constructive and good? Well, that's happening all around us in our classrooms, our museums, and our libraries, as educators take technology-enhanced learning tools and gaming and maker-centered learning and things that are attractive to young people today and say, how do I make this good and constructive to contribute to wondrous learning for the kids for whom I'm caring?
So the more we familiarized ourselves with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and the learning sciences, the more we were able to spot it in every aspect of this brilliant television program. You know, from the frenetic music that starts at the beginning of the show that slows down as Mr. Rogers comes into the front door, to the flashing yellow traffic light that helps children start to feel that they can slow down and relax enough to learning, down to the color of the walls and the warm sweater Fred Rogers puts on, everything he did in the neighborhood was designed to help kids feel safe, designed to help kids relax, designed to help kids feel that they belong and that they're ready to learn. And it's been fascinating to watch how educators around Pittsburgh and elsewhere are taking this blueprint that Rogers designed and applying it in some very modern ways. One of the things that Rogers paid very close attention to was the craftsmanship and the beauty of the set of the neighborhood itself. It was always a beautiful day. It was always clean. It was constructed with wood and natural materials and well-made things. If you go to the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild in Pittsburgh, where Bill Strickland, who is the founder, has designed this incredible community arts center, and you talk to him, he'll tell you about how he modeled that after Fred Rogers and what Fred did in the neighborhood. As we were touring the Arts Center with Bill Strickland, he said something that we'll never forget. He said, everywhere you look in this place, there's something beautiful looking back. That is deliberate. Kids see sunlight. They see flowers. They eat gourmet food. They see art on the walls. Environments like this cure cancer of the human spirit, and the kids inside them blossom. And I think that's just such a great encapsulation of how educators are applying Rogers' blueprint even today.
And another lesson I take from Bill Strickland is environment drives behavior. Bill says that all the time. And isn't that, in fact, what Mr. Rogers created in his neighborhood? It wasn't Mr. Rogers' home. It wasn't Mr. Rogers' classroom. It was Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Like Bill Strickland, Fred Rogers deeply understood that learning happens everywhere and that we can create conditions for wondrous learnings, yes, in a classroom, yes, where school takes place, but also on a field trip to a crayon factory, in meeting with the baker, right in our own homes. The conditions that we create for joyous, creative, wondrous learning and sometimes about really hard subjects, sometimes about mundane things, but really understanding, Ryan, that learning happens everywhere.
Yeah, I just want to read you a quick quote from the book. One of the many people we interviewed is Dr. Valerie Kinloch. Dr. Kinloch is the Dean of the School of Education at the University of Pittsburgh. And she said something that I think beautifully encapsulates what Greg just said. This is her talking about how she fell in love with learning. She said, "What her teachers helped her see is that the people around her were a series of books that I hadn't been reading. Everything my teachers were trying to teach me was always right in front of me. I didn't have to open a book to read it. I could just sit and listen to the conversations happening on the front porches or at the kitchen table or even in the hallways at school. And when I realized that, that's when I fell deeply in love with learning." And to me, it sounds like the neighborhood, because this wasn't Mr. Rogers' classroom, it was Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. He knew that learning happens everywhere and how important it is to value and to prioritize that kind of learning.
And he understood that attitudes are caught, something he learned deeply from his close associate, Margaret McFarland. In our book, Ryan and I close each of the 6 chapters with examples of things that we might do in our own lives, whether as a dad, a teacher in a classroom, or someone who's caring for kids. One of the people we've talked to, Hedda Sherapin, who worked with Mr. Rogers from day one of production, shared with us this great example of the Ask It basket. She recalled walking into a teacher's classroom and noticing that the teacher had a basket up in front. And she noticed as she went through the lesson that kids would ask questions, sometimes questions right on point, sometimes a question that came right out from over the left field wall. And the teacher did something amazing. No matter what the question was, that teacher took time to notice it, to acknowledge it, to write it down, and then put it in the basket and say, you know what, we're going to wonder about that later. That's something you and I can do right in the places where we're with kids. When we acknowledge and notice what's on their mind, we let them know that they belong, that their questions are okay, and that, you know what, we're going to figure out the answers together. You know, and that also in that spirit of attitudes are caught. Let me share with you an example from the early months of the pandemic. You would all be incredibly embarrassed to see my garage. It looks like a scene from Hoarders, but I will say there's tons of stuff in that garage. And as the pandemic unfolded that spring, I saw in the garage my old Madrid skateboarder. I used to be a skateboarder. I loved to skateboard. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to pull out my skateboard and go down this little hill of a street that we live on. And I did that, right? And I got on the skateboard, and you could imagine I was laughing. I was sort of hysterical. Fortunately, I didn't break any bones. I didn't fall down, get bruised. And the girls on my street, including my own girls, you know, they're running after me. They're like, what is this? What are you doing? And they could see the joy and the happiness. And, you know, I did it a couple times, and then I would help them do it. Well, you know, today, 8 girls on my street are skateboarders. And they saw that joy that I had about skateboarding. And whether your joy is in the garage or in the kitchen or in your craft studio, kids notice the things that you're doing, and your attitudes about learning are caught, and they're going to catch it.
There's a study that we note in the book that I think gets at what Greg is talking about, this idea of a caring adult's presence matters, that letting kids know that they matter to caring adults matters. In Washington State, back in the 1980s, researchers followed a group of 800 young children. And they split this group of children into 2 groups. One group got, their parents and teachers got help building stronger relationships with kids. The other group was the control group, so their parents and teachers didn't get any extra intervention. And just 2 years ago, in 2019, researchers followed up with these 2 groups of children to see what had happened in their lives. And what they found was the group whose parents and teachers had gotten extra help building strong relationships were outperforming their peers on everything. They were happier. They were making more money. They were more likely to be involved in their communities. Overall, they were just more satisfied with life. And the researchers boiled 30 years worth of work down to this beautifully simple statement, and that was just be present with your kids. When you're with them, offer your authentic self. Don't just sit there on your phone with them. Give them opportunities to bond with you. And I think we saw that in the neighborhood again and again. You know, anyone who works with children knows that trauma is widespread, that what we call adverse childhood experiences are widespread. That was true before the pandemic, is going to be especially true now. And what we see in the research again and again is that the best way to come back from bad childhood experiences, the best way to bounce back from trauma, is to be in the presence of caring adults who set routines, caring adults who set expectations, caring adults who, above all, make kids feel safe enough to have big feelings, even when those feelings might be fear, even when those feelings might be shyness. As long as kids know that their feelings are okay, they're generally in good hands.
What you've described, Ryan, is so core to the work of Fred Rogers and is present in the neighborhood. The timeless and classic role for us as grown-ups and the role of caring adults in kids' lives. Caring adults who notice their questions, who help them wonder aloud, and know that their questions matter. And that was so core to Fred Rogers' work, whether we were right there in the living room with him or we were off in the land of make-believe and then came back with the questions that we had. And I'll tell you, we experience this in our lives, whether it's right at home or as a teacher. And I know you don't pretend to be a perfect teacher, and by no means am I a perfect dad. I'll share with you a very personal example about how Fred Rogers' work and the work of this book has challenged me personally. During the course of the pandemic, I found myself in a moment one evening, lying on my living room floor, watching the television with my daughter lying behind me. My daughter, I should note, is of an age that she's developing her identity, and she herself is of mixed race. And the violence of the world, particularly some shootings of Asian Americans in Atlanta, had crept into my household. And I say that to tell you that at that moment, as I'm watching television, flipping among basketball games, I hear in my right ear, "Daddy, am I going to be shot?" Which is a question that would freeze any parent's heart. It froze my heart at that moment. There are parents across this country who've heard that question before. There are many lucky among us who will never hear a question like that. But we all face incredibly hard moments about some subject at some point with our kids, and it's really hard. And for me at that moment, it was like the lessons of this book came home to me, and I thought to myself, what do I do? How do I handle this? How do I not cry? And to be sure, I cried a lot in the aftermath of it. But at that moment, I thought, I've got to make sure that I notice the question. I've got to make sure that I convey to her that she's physically and psychologically safe. I've got to acknowledge that maybe I don't have the answers and that we're going to wonder about that together. And that's what Fred Rogers did. He made us feel safe physically and psychologically. He noticed the things that we were thinking about. He acknowledged that our big feelings were okay. And he said, we're going to wonder about questions together. And that was the beautiful part of The Neighborhood.
It's interesting that Rogers called The Neighborhood, he didn't call it a TV show. Sometimes he called it a television visit. But what he liked to call it most of all was an atmosphere. He said, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is an atmosphere that makes kids feel safe enough to be who they are. And, you know, when you start to think about that, it changes the way that you interact with kids or even with other adults. One of the most common questions we get about, when we're talking about this book was, did it change you? Did it affect you personally? And I think the answer is an unequivocal yes. I mean, for me personally, it helped me let go of the idea that you're either a good person or you're not. Rogers worked so hard at being Fred Rogers. This book, it showed us that being a good person, being a good neighbor, creating that atmosphere in which people feel safe, is not a gift that you're given or not given. It's a daily practice. It's something you have to get up every day and decide to do. It's something you have to go to bed every night and think about how well you did it and determine to be better the next day. Nobody did that better than Rogers, but once you know that it's something he worked at, it's something you realize that you can work at too.
I love that you use the word good. One of the things that Fred Rogers said around the millennium, he offered this challenge to us as adults, and he said, how do you make goodness attractive? And thinking about that atmosphere that teachers are creating in their classrooms, that librarians are creating in their libraries, that early childhood educators and youth workers and others are trying to create, that's what they're doing every day all around us, endeavoring to make goodness attractive. And it was a challenge, too, put to us by Mrs. Rogers. We had the great joy of knowing Mrs. Rogers, of talking with her about this book when it was a mere idea, gaining her support as a champion. And it's one of the great regrets of this book is that with publication and with her recent passing, that we can't share this book with her. She was a champion in her own right, a champion for making goodness attractive. And just like Fred Rogers, she wanted that for us in the work that we all do in the places where we're caring for kids. And that's one of the things that we've tried to convey in this book. How is it that we all make goodness attractive and humanize learning experiences for our kids?
You know, there is a moment in the foreword where Joanne meets some new parents in a hospital nursery, and she is trying to think of, what is the one simplest, truest piece of advice I know? And what she tells them is being there for each other and supporting one another is what it's all about. And I think if I want readers to take anything from this book, it's an expression of that phrase. How are we seeing, how are we supporting, how are we showing up for ourselves, for our kids, and for one another? How are we committing to that daily practice of being better parents, better teachers, better neighbors? It's really hard work, but I think in committing to that work, we also lead more fulfilling lives.
And in committing to that work, I want to read for you just the last page of our epilogue, because it speaks to exactly this. So why do we find such comfort in the world of Mr. Rogers? If the neighborhood was more than beautiful days and pleasant songs, and the sheer niceness for which we revere it, why does it feel like a refuge? Actress Mary Rawson, who played Cousin Mary Owl in The Neighborhood of Make-Believe, offers a theory. In the neighborhood, violence and war, hatred and intolerance are not painted out of the picture, she writes, but neither are they allowed to destroy the canvas. The real gift that Fred Rogers gave us was hope. Hope that with the tools for learning that he worked so hard to teach us, we would find within ourselves the strength to confront hard problems. Hope that we'd reach to find the courage to love thy neighbor. Hope that caring adults would protect us, and that each of us would in turn become caring adults ourselves. Rogers gave us hope that despite everything, the canvas was worth defending. If the people we met while writing this book are any indication, such hope was not misplaced. Every day in Pittsburgh and beyond, parents, educators, and young people themselves are doing what Rogers did, combining timeless ideas with new ways of learning to make the world more accepting, more compassionate, and more humane. At the Saturday Light Brigade and at Steeltown, they're using podcasts and films to celebrate their differences and to shine a light on their similarities. They're using simple interactions to turn mundane moments into loving affirmations. They're learning side by side at Remake Learning Days, growing closer together in the process. And at programs like GirlGov, they're giving kids a direct say in democracy, in what something else will look like. It's a kind of work that's never really finished. Rogers, of course, knew this all along. When he aired his final episode in August 2001, he gave us no indication that we'd reached the end. There's an arts festival in Make-Believe. Rogers tells us he's proud of us, and as he walks out the door, he waves goodbye and tells us he'll see us again. It must have seemed like an odd final line from a man who insisted at every turn that his program speak honestly to children. Why, at the end of something, would he focus on the beginning of something else? Why would he tell us he'd be back the next time, if next time hadn't been planned? Perhaps because next time is now, and next time is tomorrow, and next time is the day after that. Perhaps because the work of the neighborhood, which is the work of learning that we're loved and capable of loving, is infinite. Love, Rogers said, isn't a state of perfect caring. It is an active noun like struggle. To love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly the way he or she is, right here and now. If we want to raise curious, creative, caring human beings, then we have our work cut out for us. May we offer that love and carry on with that striving for the rest of our days.
So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for the moving personal stories you've shared with us as we've been talking about this book. And most of all, thank you for reading, and thanks for the work you do.
And thank you for what you do, whatever you do in kids' lives. We hope that you find fuel, maybe refueling, in the words of this book, and more importantly, in the blueprint that Fred Rogers left for us all to raise creative, curious, and caring kids wherever they are and whatever they're doing. Thank you, everyone.